After 30 years of loyalty, my husband betrayed me, so I destroyed his perfect life. 30 minutes after I delivered my baby girl through an emergency C-section, while I was still shaking from trauma and bleeding on a hospital bed, my husband looked down at our newborn daughter, crossed his arms, and cold-bloodedly said, "I'm not signing the birth certificate until we get a DNA test." At first, I thought my exhausted brain was playing tricks on me. But when I looked at my mother-in-law sitting in the corner, holding a cold cup of coffee, I didn't see shock on her face. I saw absolute, frantic terror. That night, I realized my husband wasn't accusing me of cheating because he doubted my loyalty. He was accusing me because he was desperately trying to hide the secret 14-year-old son and second family he had been keeping 40 miles away. Here's how a brutal delivery room accusation exposed my husband's entire secret double life and how I burned his glass house to the ground. The sharp smell of antiseptic and cold rain hung heavily in the delivery room of St. Jude's Hospital in Seattle. Clara lay motionless against the starched white sheets, her body trembling from 22 arduous hours of labor. Outside the high-arched windows, fog rolled over the dark waters of Puget Sound. Beside her bed, tucked inside a clear plastic bassinet, lay baby Maya, her tiny fingers clutching the air as she uttered faint, rhythmic squeaks. Clara closed her eyes, seeking a single moment of rest, when she heard the heavy footsteps of her husband, Julian, approaching the bed. He was an architect known for his pristine precision, dressed impeccably despite the late hour. But when Clara looked up, expecting to see tears of relief or warmth in his eyes, she saw only cold, calculating detachment. "Clara," Julian said, his voice flat and measured. "Before I put my name on the birth certificate, I want a formal DNA test." The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Clara stared at him, her exhausted mind struggling to process the sentence. "What did you just say?" "I need absolute certainty," Julian continued, crossing his arms like an auditor reviewing a questionable ledger. "You were in Vancouver for 4 days last autumn attending that Regional Preservation Summit. The timing of the conception window aligns exactly with that week." A hollow, disbelieving laugh escaped Clara's lips. "The summit? Julian, I called you 3 times every night. You booked my hotel room yourself." "Calling someone doesn't prove where you were every hour," Julian replied without flinching. "I deserve peace of mind." In the corner of the room sat Julian's mother, Evelyn, holding a lukewarm cup of tea. Evelyn was a matriarch who prided herself on family tradition and social standing. Yet, as Clara glanced at her mother-in-law, she noticed something disturbing. Evelyn didn't look shocked by her son's cruel demand. Instead, Evelyn's knuckles turned white around her paper cup, her eyes wide with a frantic, animal terror. "Julian, please," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling as she looked at the doorway. "This isn't the place or the time for such discussions." "No, Mother," Julian insisted, stepping closer to Clara's bed. "If Clara has nothing to hide, she shouldn't object to a simple swab." Nurse Sarah, a veteran midwife with silver hair, stopped adjusting Clara's drip and turned around slowly. "Sir, your wife just delivered a child less than 45 minutes ago after severe complications. You need to step outside if you cannot offer support." With shaking fingers, Clara reached for her phone on the bedside tray. "Who are you calling at 2 in the morning?" Julian demanded, narrowing his eyes. "Clara, dear, don't make rash decisions while you're emotional," Evelyn pleaded, rising quickly from her chair with visible panic. Clara ignored them both and dialed her longtime university friend, Hannah Vance, a ruthless corporate and family law attorney. When Hannah answered on the second ring, Clara kept her eyes locked on Julian's face. "Hannah," Clara said, her voice steady despite her trembling body. "Draft the separation papers tomorrow morning. My husband just demanded a paternity test in the delivery room." For days later, Clara brought Maya home to their ultra-modern glass and timber home overlooking the misty slopes of Mercer Island. The house was a masterpiece Julian had designed himself, flooded with natural light, sleek concrete finishes, and vast open spaces. Yet, stepping inside, Clara felt as if she were walking into a sterile gallery rather than a home. Julian carried the infant car seat into the entryway, set it down without a word, and immediately retired to his glass-walled home office at the far end of the hallway. He didn't offer to help Clara carry the bags, nor did he ask if she needed medication for her recovering surgical stitches. He treated her not with outright hostility, but with an agonizing, clinical distance. Over the next fortnight, life became a blur of midnight feedings, crying spells, and cold silence. Julian moved his belongings into the guest suite above the garage, claiming he needed undisturbed sleep for his multi-million-dollar waterfront commercial projects. Meanwhile, subtle rumors began circulating among their social circle. Clara received cautious, pitying text messages from acquaintances at the local arts foundation, asking if she was holding up through this complicated season. Julian had not openly accused her to their friends, but he had masterfully dropped hints of unforeseen doubts, framing himself as a heartbroken husband seeking truth. One rainy afternoon, while Maya slept in her crib, Evelyn arrived bearing gourmet soups and designer baby clothes. As always, Evelyn moved through the house with nervous, erratic energy, endlessly rearranging cushions and polishing countertops that were already spotless. "Clara, darling," Evelyn said softly, setting down a pristine silver spoon. Men often experience severe psychological panic when a baby arrives. Julian is under immense pressure at his firm. You mustn't take his temporary doubts to heart. Clara leaned against the kitchen island, holding a mug of cold chamomile tea. "Evelyn, he implied I was unfaithful less than an hour after I nearly bled out on an operating table. That isn't stress. That is malice." Evelyn's hands trembled as she wiped the counter. "You don't understand the burden of keeping a family together, Clara. Sometimes we must endure discomfort to protect our legacy." Later that evening, while Julian was out attending what he called an emergency client dinner in downtown Seattle, Clara went into his home office to retrieve a spare printer cartridge. While searching through the bottom drawers of his mahogany desk, her hand brushed against an old leather-bound journal tucked behind a stack of architectural blueprints. Curiosity overcame her. She pulled the journal out. Inside the front cover, tucked into the leather lining, was a faded silver pocket watch. Clara opened the latch. Engraved on the inner lid were the words, "To my dearest dad, happy 12th birthday. Love, Oliver. 2021. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the engraving until the letters blurred. Julian had no brothers, no nephews named Oliver, and he and Clara had spent 9 years believing Maya was his first and only child. The realization struck her like a physical blow. Evelyn's terror in the hospital room had nothing to do with Clara's fidelity. Evelyn was terrified that Julian's hidden past was about to be unraveled. Clara did not scream, nor did she hurl the silver pocket watch at Julian when he returned home late that night smelling of expensive whiskey and rain. Her younger self might have confronted him immediately, demanding explanations and weeping for answers. But motherhood and betrayal had transformed her within weeks. She understood that a man who had lied so effortlessly for years would only spin more elaborate webs if cornered without undeniable proof. The following morning, Clara met Hannah at a quiet cafe in Bellevue. Hannah reviewed the photo Clara had taken of the engraved pocket watch and listened intently to the details of Evelyn's strange behavior. "If Julian has another child, he has been diverting marital assets to support them," Hannah said, stirring her black coffee calmly. "In Washington state, that constitutes dissipation of community property. But we need hard documentation, not just an engraved watch." Hannah connected Clara with Marcus Reed, a retired federal investigator who specialized in high-net-worth matrimonial forensics. Marcus was a quiet, gray-haired man who worked out of an unassuming office in Tacoma. Clara paid his retainer by selling a diamond necklace her late grandmother had bequeathed to her, a painful sacrifice, but one she made without hesitation for her daughter's future. For 3 weeks, while Julian maintained his icy demeanor at home and repeatedly reminded Clara that the DNA lab results would settle everything, Marcus systematically traced Julian's digital and financial footprints. The findings were staggering. Julian had not merely had a brief affair, he maintained an entire parallel life 40 miles south in the quiet suburb of Tacoma. He had purchased a charming craftsman bungalow 12 years ago under a limited liability company registered in his mother's maiden name. The utility bills, property taxes, and monthly allowance transfers had been meticulously funded through a shell consulting firm Julian had created years prior. Every time Julian had claimed to be attending weekend architectural seminars in Portland or site inspections along the coast, he had been living as a father to a boy named Oliver and a partner to a woman named Sarah Jenkins. One evening, while Julian was upstairs taking a shower, his personal phone chimed on the kitchen counter. Clara stepped over and looked at the lock screen. A text message read, "Oliver's piano recital is this Friday at 6 p.m. Are you still coming down?" Clara took a clear photograph of the screen with her own phone, placed his device back precisely where it had been, and walked into the nursery. She pulled Maya close to her chest, listening to the soft sound of her breathing. The DNA test Julian had demanded was never about genuine suspicion. It was a desperate, aggressive psychological tactic to place Clara on the defensive, so she would be too overwhelmed by self-defense to notice his double life. On an overcast Thursday morning, Clara drove south down Interstate 5 toward Tacoma, leaving Maya in the care of a trusted professional nanny. The rain fell in steady, heavy sheets against her windshield, matching the somber mood in her chest. Marcus had provided her with the exact address of the Craftsman bungalow in a tree-lined residential neighborhood. Clara parked across the street under the shade of a large maple tree and watched the house. It was painted a warm sage green, with colorful children's bikes leaning against the porch and manicured flower beds lining the walkway, a home that looked intensely lived in and loved. At 10 a.m., a woman in her early fortnight 40s stepped out onto the porch carrying a laundry basket. She had soft features, tied-back brown hair, and wore a cozy knit sweater. This was Sarah Jenkins. Clara took a deep breath, stepped out of her vehicle, and walked across the wet street. As she approached the steps, Sarah looked up, initially offering a polite, neighborly smile. "Sarah?" Clara asked quietly. "Yes," Sarah replied, pausing with the basket in her hands. "Can I help you?" "My name is Clara Vance," she said steadily. "I am Julian's wife." The color drained from Sarah's face so rapidly that she almost dropped the laundry basket. She gripped the porch railing, her eyes wide with shock. "Julian told me. He said you two were divorced 4 years ago. He said you lived in London." Clara offered a sad, gentle smile. "May I come inside? I think we both have a great deal of truth to share." Inside the warm, wood-paneled living room, framed family photographs lined the mantelpiece. There were pictures of Julian holding a newborn Oliver, Julian attending Little League games, and Julian posing with Sarah on holiday in Hawaii. It was a complete portrait of a family that had existed alongside Clara's entire marriage. As they sat at the dining table with 2 untouched cups of coffee, Sarah wept softly as the truth unfolded. Julian had met Sarah 14 years ago when she worked as an interior contractor on one of his early commercial builds. When she became pregnant with Oliver, Julian promised her that he was finalizing an amicable divorce with a woman who was emotionally unstable and career-obsessed. To keep Sarah from reaching out to Clara, Julian had claimed Clara was volatile and vindictive, fabricating a narrative that kept both women entirely isolated from one another. "And his mother?" Clara asked. "Evelyn visits every Christmas," Sarah confessed, wiping her eyes with a tissue. She told me she had to keep our existence quiet from her high society friends to protect Julian's career, but she always brought all of her birthday checks. Clara reached into her handbag and pulled out an unopened envelope that had arrived in her mailbox that very morning. It was the official paternity lab report. She slid it across the table to Sarah. Sarah opened it and read the bold black text at the bottom. Probability of paternity, 99.9999%. He demanded this test 30 minutes after I gave birth, Clara said, her voice filled with quiet strength. He tried to ruin my reputation and make me feel insane because he was terrified his two worlds were colliding. 2 weeks later, the annual Pacific Northwest Architectural Society Gala was held in the Grand Ballroom of the Bellevue Club. It was the premier event of the season for high society professionals, property developers, and city council members. Julian was not only attending, he was receiving the prestigious Architect of the Year award for his sustainable urban designs. Evelyn had spent weeks preparing for the gala, inviting her prominent socialite friends and arranging a front-row VIP table near the stage. Julian was in high spirits, wearing a tailored tuxedo and chatting comfortably with investors near the Champagne Tower. He treated Clara with a patronizing, grand gesture of courtesy throughout the evening, introducing her to colleagues as my brave wife, who has had a challenging transition after childbirth. At 8:30 p.m., the Society's president took the podium to introduce Julian. A large projection screen behind the stage was set up to play a slideshow of Julian's signature architectural achievements. Before Julian takes the stage to accept this honor, the president announced into the microphone, his family has prepared a special video presentation highlighting his personal and professional journey. Julian smiled modestly, buttoning his jacket as he stood up from the VIP table. Evelyn beamed beside him, clutching her pearl necklace proudly. Clara sat calmly at the table, wearing an elegant emerald green gown. Beneath the table, her hand was poised over her tablet, connected seamlessly to the venue's AV system via the coordinator, whom Hannah had legally authorized earlier that afternoon. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The large projection screen flickered to life. But instead of floor plans and glossy photos of modern skyscrapers, the screen displayed a high-resolution scan of baby Maya's DNA test results, showing 99.9999% paternity certainty. A subtle murmur ran through the audience of 300 guests. Julian's smile froze. Before he could react, the screen transitioned to the next slide. Certified bank records showing $420,000 in unauthorized wire transfers over 12 years from Julian's primary firm account to an entity titled Emerald Construction LLC. What is the meaning of this? Julian hissed, whirling around to face Clara, his face turning pale in the dark room. Clara, turn that off immediately. Clara did not move. The screen changed again. This time, it displayed clear, vibrant photographs of the Craftsman house in Tacoma, followed by photos of Julian, Sarah, and 14-year-old Oliver smiling at Christmas dinner, flanked by Evelyn. The ballroom descended into dead silence. Gasps echoed from the surrounding tables. Prominent developers and city officials stared at the screen in utter astonishment. Evelyn stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward, crashing against the carpet. "Turn it off. Somebody turn it off," she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. Clara stood up slowly, her posture regal and unyielding. She reached into her clutch bag, pulled out a thick navy folder containing formal divorce petitions, asset restraint orders, and a summons for fraud, and placed it firmly on Julian's dinner plate. "Congratulations on your award, Julian," Clara said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "You spent 9 years accusing me of instability and demanding proof of my loyalty, when every step you took was a carefully constructed lie. You don't get to hide behind your glass houses anymore." Clara turned on her heel and walked down the central aisle of the ballroom, her head held high, leaving Julian standing beneath the glowing projection of his double life, while whispers exploded like wildfire behind her. The aftermath of the Bellevue Gala was a tempest of legal battles, public fallout, and media scrutiny. Within 48 hours, the board of Julian's architectural firm placed him on indefinite administrative leave to protect the firm's commercial reputation. Several high-profile municipal clients canceled their contracts, unwilling to be associated with a high-visibility fraud investigation. Julian did not go quietly. Deprived of his polished public image, he launched an aggressive legal war through his high-priced defense attorneys. He attempted to claim that Clara had unlawfully breached his privacy and requested sole custody of Maya, arguing that Clara was mentally unfit due to postpartum depression. Every week brought a fresh barrage of legal motions, court affidavits, and financial disputes. Clara found herself spending long hours in Hannah's office, reviewing bank statements, tax returns, and property deeds while nursing Maya in between consultations. "He's using litigation as a weapon of exhaustion," Hannah warned Clara during a late-night strategy session. "He knows you don't have his corporate capital, so he wants to force you into a cheap settlement out of sheer fatigue." "I survived his mind games in the maternity ward," Clara replied quietly, looking down at her sleeping baby. "He cannot tire me out." Clara returned to her former career as an independent architectural archivist sooner than planned, taking on freelance consulting projects for historical preservation societies to ensure financial autonomy. Her days became a grueling marathon, waking up at 5 a.m. to review legal briefs, managing client deadlines, caring for a growing infant, and enduring tense, court-ordered drop-offs with Julian at a neutral custody center. Julian's personal demeanor during these drop-offs was cold and vengeful. He refused to look Clara in the eye, speaking only through a court-monitored messaging application. He blamed her entirely for the ruin of his career, refusing to acknowledge that his own deceit had caused his downfall. Evelyn attempted to contact Clara multiple times, sending long, emotional letters begging Clara to drop the financial fraud charges for the sake of family honor. Clara filed the letters directly with her legal team, refusing to engage in emotional blackmail. Through the grueling process, Clara discovered an unexpected inner fortitude. The luxurious life she had shared with Julian had been built on a foundation of sand. Stepping away from it, though painful and exhausting, allowed her to stand on solid ground for the first time in a decade. 6 months into the divorce proceedings, Clara received an unexpected phone call from Sarah Jenkins. They agreed to meet at a neutral park in Puget Sound, away from lawyers and courtroom tension. The afternoon was crisp and clear, with seagulls soaring over the sparkling blue waters of the Sound. Oliver was off playing basketball nearby, while Maya sat on a blanket, happily playing with wooden blocks. Sarah looked visibly changed. The timid, anxious woman Clara had met on the Tacoma porch had gained a quiet confidence. She had formally separated from Julian after discovering that he had also been lying to her regarding his financial holdings and personal trusts. "I wanted to apologize," Sarah said, watching her son play in the distance. "For years, I believed his narrative about you. I allowed him to keep Oliver hidden in the shadows because I thought I was protecting him from a bitter ex-wife." "You were a victim of his design just as much as I was," Clara answered softly. Julian constructed 2 different realities, so he could play the savior in both without ever being accountable to either. Sarah pulled a small USB drive from her purse and handed it to Clara. "Julian asked me last week to hide several offshore investment accounts he established 5 years ago. He wanted me to hold them in Oliver's name so they wouldn't be included in your divorce discovery." Clara stared at the small drive in surprise. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because my son deserves to grow up seeing what integrity looks like," Sarah said firmly. "I don't want Julian's corrupted money, and I won't let him use Oliver as a pawn in his legal games against you and Maya." The collaboration between Clara and Sarah proved to be the decisive blow in the divorce proceedings. Presented with indisputable evidence of hidden offshore assets and attempted asset hiding, the family court judge ruled decisively in Clara's favor. Clara was awarded primary physical custody of Maya, substantial child support, and an equitable division of the marital estate, including the proceeds from the sale of the Mercer Island house. More importantly, Clara and Sarah established a respectful, transparent boundary. They agreed that while they did not need to be close friends, Oliver and Maya, who were half-siblings, would be given the opportunity to know each other truthfully as they grew up, free from secrets and toxicity. A year after the cold night in St. Jude's Hospital, Clara sat on the porch of a charming two-story townhouse in Edmonds, overlooking the waters of the marina. The home was modest compared to the vast glass mansion on Mercer Island, but it was filled with warmth, plants, artwork, and real light. Inside, 14-month-old Maya was taking her first shaky, confident steps across the hardwood floor, squealing with delight as she balanced herself against a soft armchair. The divorce was fully finalized. Julian had relocated to a smaller firm in another state, his social standing permanently altered and his grand architectural ambitions curtailed by court-ordered obligations. Evelyn had retreated from her high society clubs, unable to face the community she had spent a lifetime trying to impress. Clara poured herself a fresh cup of coffee and leaned against the porch railing, watching the morning sun burn through the coastal fog. Her life was far from effortless. She worked long hours, managed a demanding career as a single mother, and still carried the quiet scars of deep betrayal. Yet, as she breathed in the fresh sea air, she felt an overwhelming sense of profound peace. She was no longer walking on eggshells, no longer doubting her own reality, and no longer married to a ghost built on illusion. She walked inside, picked up her laughing daughter, and held her close. The story that had begun with humiliation and cruelty in a hospital room had not broken her, it had freed her. Conclusion: key lessons and moral takeaways. This story illustrates powerful psychological, relational, and practical truths about human nature, betrayal, and self-recovery. Unprovoked accusations are often projections of guilt. When a partner suddenly and aggressively accuses you of infidelity or deceit without any factual basis, especially during moments when you are most vulnerable, it is frequently a defense mechanism known as projection. People living double lives often accuse others of betrayal to deflect suspicion away from themselves, relieve their own internal guilt, and place their partner in a defensive posture. Pay attention to how people treat you in vulnerability. A person's true character is revealed not during periods of prosperity and ease, but in moments when you are weak, vulnerable, or in need of support. Someone who chooses to humiliate, doubt, or attack you when you are at your lowest point is demonstrating a profound lack of empathy and commitment. Emotional calm is more powerful than loud confrontation. When faced with severe deceit, exploding in immediate anger often gives the manipulative person an opportunity to label you as unstable or dramatic. Gathering facts quietly, seeking professional legal guidance, and responding with calm, strategic evidence strips the deceiver of their power and preserves your dignity. Victims of the same manipulator are not enemies. Manipulative individuals thrive on keeping the women, or people, in their lives divided, constructing false narratives to turn them against one another. Truth and healing begin when victims stop fighting each other and recognize the shared pattern of manipulation. Starting over is not failure, it is the beginning of truth. Leaving an unhealthy, life-filled marriage, even late in life or under difficult financial and emotional circumstances, is not a defeat. Rebuilding a smaller, honest life on your own terms is always far safer and more fulfilling than living in luxury built upon deception.